over to Mr. Kirk Lee.
Good morning, all. Hope you're all well. I'm just going to share the presentation, so just bear with me. Okay. Right, can everyone see the slide?
Yes.
Yep, excellent, perfect. And if I just flip that forwards just to make sure, has it moved on a slide?
Yes, it has.
Excellent, perfect, thank you. So let's say good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining in today. So I'm going to try and keep the presentation down to an hour, so it's quite a bit to go through. So we're going to move at a slight pace just to get this, get to the key content. Just going to go through. I mean, you've already heard some of my experience. I mean, it's just a brief slide with some of the other experience. So, for instance, this year I've already done medical trackside paramedic for World Superbikes at Donington Racetrack, British Superbikes as well. I've been doing Taekwondo and rugby medical for quite a long time now. Also training beach lifeguards as well for many, many years. So yes, we've already had a lot of head injuries in superbikes this year, as you can imagine, and some fairly serious injuries there, 150-mile-per-hour crashes as well. So that's just a little kind of reflection of some of the stuff I've done over the years. I'll let you read that one for a second, and I'll just pull out the key detail. So the key thing here is probably that sentence there: without a concussion policy, this leaves the potential for competitors to sustain a concussion and be allowed to continue and fight and compete. So a concussion policy had to come in. If you look at what we've adopted the SCAT-5, which is the Sport Concussion Assessment Tool 5. So it's in its 5th iteration. And this was something which has been developed by some of the biggest sporting organizations in the world: FIFA, international rugby, hockey, for instance, and also the Olympics. So we are using a tool which has been adapted by, well, we've adapted a tool which is being used by them. It's got some of the top researchers and top doctors in the world who have done the research, and this is where it's at the moment. We'll go through little bits and pieces as we go along. There are bits we've had to slightly change for sparring. For instance, if you look at a team event like rugby, some of the questions on recent memory are very much focused on a team event. So we've had to change some of what they call the Maddox questions. But in essence, everything else is as it is for the SCAT-5. So we're just going to go through some symptoms of concussion. So symptoms is how people feel. So for instance, headache, ringing in the ears, nausea, vomiting, fatigue or drowsiness, and blurry vision. So for instance, someone might present with a headache during the round. So they've taken a kick or a punch to the head and they present with an immediate headache. Or sometimes they may continue without any obvious signs and symptoms of concussion. And then they may present themselves to the medical team after the fight or a short period of time after the fight. And often I've seen this over the years, you know, they're complaining of headache, slight blurry vision, and when we assess them on a pain score of 0 to 10. So 10 being the most painful thing you can imagine. So if someone comes to you and says they've got a pain score of 4 out of 10 for their headache, and yet half hour later they come back and go, it's getting worse, and you ask them again and they say it's now a pain score of 7 out of 10, this is what we would call a worsening headache. This person will have to go to hospital to usually they would get scanned in that instance if they've got a worsening headache after a concussion. Yeah, I think we saw it at it was the Spanish Euros last year. There was a competitor who received a concussion and immediately started vomiting several times on ringside. So other signs, we've got confusion or feeling as in a fog. So confusion actually technically is a slightly lower level of consciousness. So again, that person would be removed from competition immediately. Amnesia, classic. I've had concussion myself. I'm sure many people I've spoken to over the years who've had concussion have amnesia. Sometimes it's what we call 2-minute memory. You get people who, for instance, they've had an impact to the head, and then as they sort of, they're looking slightly blurry at you, and they ask you ask them what's happened, they can't remember. You then explain to them what's happened, and then they have a chat with you. 2 minutes later, they ask you what's happened again. They have no memory of the conversation 2 minutes before. And this just keeps going on, keeps going on. Every 2 minutes, they ask you what happened. And every 2 minutes, you tell them what's happened, and then they forget it. So amnesia, there's also other types of amnesia as well, just trying to locate certain words and thoughts for a period of days afterwards. We've got dizziness, seeing stars. We've also got temporary loss of consciousness. Doesn't always occur, but we have seen this in the last 2 competitions. Slurred speech, delayed response to questions, dazed appearance, forgetfulness, such as repeatedly asking the same question as we were just elaborating just now. So temporary loss of consciousness, this can be a little bit tricky to observe sometimes, because we've seen it in the last couple of competitions where people, to the trained eye, you will see that they've had a temporary loss of consciousness, because as they've gone down, for instance, they've lost body tone. So the body's become completely limp. But then as soon as they've hit the floor, they've almost rolled and then started to get up again. So to the untrained eye, people might have missed the fact that the body just went completely limp. Or sometimes it's the fact that they're just lying motionless on the floor for 5 to 10 seconds. You may have some symptoms of concussion immediately. So concentration and memory complaints may be immediate. Irritability and other personality changes, sensitivity to light and noise. So I remember many years ago playing rugby and tackling someone who was probably in the UK we'd call it stone, someone who's probably about 28 stone. I don't know how it equates in kilograms, a good 120, 130 kilograms, and getting a knee straight to my head. And all I remember is just heightened sensitivity to light and noise for several days afterwards. Everything just seemed vividly bright. You can get sleep disturbances as well as the brain tries to heal itself, because there's neurochemical changes going on. Psychological adjustments such as problems and depression. So some people just feel down for a period of time after it. And then you can get disorders of taste and smell. For instance, there's been quite a bit of research in recent years on concussion in American footballers and levels of depression where they've had repeated blows to the head. And where it's quite interesting where some of their brains have been scanned. It's almost like the brains almost have like holes in the brains. It's like almost like a Swiss cheese effect. So some quite dramatic changes to the brain there. So we'll carry on. So this slide looks a little bit busy. We're going to dive into it shortly. This is talking about the pathophysiology of traumatic brain injury. So pathology is just disease, disorder. Physiology is function. So this is the function of disease. So this is the function of the disease of a traumatic brain injury. So a concussion is a traumatic brain injury. If we look a little bit closer on the picture on the left-hand side there, we've got a direct impact. So someone's either hit their head against a wall or floor, or someone's been punched to the head, or someone's been kicked to the head. So in this instance, you will have obviously damage to the bar. So you will get this, we call it brain shaking, but it basically, the impact zone is obviously in the front of the head there. You're going to get neurochemical changes within that part of the brain. However, the picture on the right shows a non-impact injury. So this might be something like whiplash, for instance. So someone whose head suddenly violently moves forwards whiplash in like a car accident, but they don't actually, the head doesn't hit the steering wheel, for instance. The head goes forwards, flips back. So as it goes forwards, the front of the brain hits the inside of the skull, and as the brain flips back, the back of the brain hits the skull. So this is called a coup and a contre coup. I do believe Master Lear translated that as just injury last week in French, but I will jog my memory on that one. So this could happen in Taekwondo. Someone could be kicked in very hard into the abdomen. Their head could shoot forwards, the brain hits the front, the brain hits the skull, and then the head shoots back and the back of the brain hits the skull. So just because someone's not being kicked or hit to the head doesn't mean that they can't have a concussion. And I have seen it in Taekwondo more than once over the years where people have presented with quite bad concussions, and yet there was no obvious hit to the head in that instance. The other one is where people get kicked quite hard and then the back of their head hits the floor, for instance. Again, so the back of the head, that would be a direct impact as the brain hits the back of the skull. This slide here is showing the neurochemical changes. So neuro, just brain chemical changes after a TBI, so a traumatic brain injury. And what you'll see is you've got a baseline, the dotted line there is baseline where everything should be, and then the time scale below. So you're talking within the first 2 minutes, and then eventually it's showing what happens up to 10 days after. So within the first 2 minutes of a concussion, you can see that the green line and the blue line shoot up massively. So there's a massive increase in use of calcium and potassium in the brain. Now, calcium, potassium, sodium, they're all involved in the neurotransmitters, so the electrical signals going into the brain. So for instance, what we're seeing there is a massive increase in electrical activity in the brain because the brain's using the electrolytes. So as it shows there, a massive increase within the first 2 minutes of electrolyte use. Other changes, there's an increase in glucose metabolism, which is the orange line. And then the little purple line is the increase in glutamate. But the red line, which drops down below, is actually a decrease in blood flow to the brain. So we've got almost an immediate effect of decrease in blood flow to the brain. And blood carries glucose and it carries oxygen to the brain. So this effect here is then joined after, usually about 360 minutes. It gets to its sort of peak levels there. You see that the glucose levels drop down, and you've also got a massive reduction in blood flow still going on. And this lasts for past 10 days, up to 10 days or past 10 days. So what we're saying here is that if someone has got a massive reduction in oxygen to the brain, which is the primary fuel source of the brain, and a massive reduction in, let's say glucose, oxygen, if someone gets hit again within that period of time, we've got something called second impact syndrome. So if you've already got a drop in oxygen and glucose in the brain and you get hit again, you will have a further drop in oxygen and glucose to the brain. So your fuel source to the brain gets even further depleted. And in that instance, this could end up with permanent disability because of lack of oxygen to the brain or glucose to the brain, or even death. So it's really, really, really important that we make sure that a concussion is diagnosed, is recognized, and the person is removed from competition or even training until the brain is healed. So the general consensus in sport nowadays, I know some sports have got slight differences in it, is the general consensus in sport is to have 3 weeks off training and competition, so there is no chance of having a second impact within that period of time. Unfortunately, certain sports like rugby over the years where concussions haven't been recognized and people have been allowed to continue to play with a concussion, and then they've had a second impact during that same game, people have died. So in other sports, people have died from a second impact syndrome. So it's really, really, really important that we recognize that someone's got a concussion, remove them, and then at 3 weeks, they are then assessed in their country, because we appreciate this competition is going in Slovenia. So they're then assessed in their own country by their doctor or a sports concussion healthcare professional, so that they are no longer symptomatic of concussion. So we're basically saying these early neurochemical events quickly deplete cellular energy stores. In this case, it's the brain cells, so the neurons, so their energy stores of glucose, and obviously they don't get access to oxygen. So second impact syndrome, or commonly known as SIS, happens when the brain swells rapidly shortly after a person suffers a second concussion before symptoms from an earlier concussion have subsided. So the problem, as we say here, is the swelling of the brain. The swelling of the brain is what causes massive brain damage. So we've got a reduction in oxygen, we've got a reduction in glucose, we get a massive swelling of the brain, and between those events, you end up with permanent brain damage or even death. Sometimes second impact syndrome is also referred to as repetitive head injury syndrome. And then we've got another disease which has taken prevalence in recent years, which is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Right, so encephalopathy is just talking. So anything with opathy on the end is a disorder or disease, and therefore encephalopathy is a disorder or disease of functioning of the brain. Right, so this is a chronic long-term disease of functioning of the brain, and it's caused by trauma. So in this case, it could be repetitive hits to the head. It could be repetitive, falling over, for instance, if someone's clumsy. But they used to, if you look at some of the reports of boxers from many years ago, they used to say that people who've done boxing for a while used to act as if they were punch drunk, because they would have slurred speech, they would have slight difficulty in locating words within their brain or thoughts, they would be slightly slow. This would be, this would happen over a period of time, but people who knew the individual would notice that they had become slower in themselves, and this kind of, long-term slurring of the speech. So this was probably an early look at sort of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. We've had some incidents in recent years where there have been rugby players. So, for instance, the 2003 Rugby World Cup, the hooker, the England hooker, he says he had definitely had a concussion within that game. However, he carried on playing. No one recognised it. He has now got early onset dementia. So this would be obviously a result of repetitive hits to the head over a period of time. He has early onset dementia. I think he's in his late 40s now. So in the SCAT-5, this is one of the first tables. So we have an on-field assessment. So I'll let you just read that before I say anything. So this table here is part of the on-field assessment. So the red flags are red flags for immediate removal from competition. So if someone presents with neck pain or tenderness, they should be removed from competition. Now, sometimes what happens is that someone, when they're assessed ringside by the medical professional, it's not central neck pain as in C-spine neck pain. It's not bony tenderness. It's actually, they might have a little bit of a strain to the neck, to the side of the neck. Yeah, I mean, specifically, we're looking for the neck pain as in C-spine, but obviously they would have to be assessed. Double vision. I saw that very recently. I was doing medical for a superbikes last week, just a local competition, and someone had clear double vision. Weakness or tingling, burning in the arms or legs, so technically known as paresthesia. So if someone's got a kind of weakness in the limbs or a tingling, then again, that is a classic sign of someone with a spinal injury, for instance. So again, I've seen this a few times over years, but one of the times was when I was doing some beach lifeguarding a few years back, and someone had dived in off a basically off a 6-foot harbour wall into what he thought was 6 foot deeper water, but there was a sandbank underneath, and so the sandbank was 1 foot underneath the water, and he hit it. Eyewitness testimony was he then momentum carried him on forwards, and he looked like he was trying to turn himself but couldn't turn himself, And because there was no beach lifeguards anywhere near the harbour, his friends went over and just turned him over, and they said you could see his arms moving, but as soon as he turned over, he was literally limp. Now they dragged him onto the slipway. We came along on a rescue boat, and all I remember was one of the first symptoms he turned around and said was, I've got tingling all over my body. Yeah. So yeah, he was paralyzed from the neck down. But again, so potentially you could have a suspected spinal injury, which would manifest as tingling within the arms or legs, but with the right treatment, with right immobilization, they will make a recovery. Again, we've already talked about the severe increasing headache, seizure or convulsions. Again, seen this a few times over years with head injuries where people immediately go into a seizure or convulsion, yet they've got no history of epilepsy. Loss of consciousness, we've had this a few times, deteriorating consciousness state, or so someone is alert and then they start to act confused, and the next thing you know, they're really drowsy and you have to talk to them, and they will open their eyes when you talk to them. And then the next kind of level as they deteriorate would be responding to pain in simplistic terms, and then eventually they become unresponsive. So any deterioration in conscious state, they will need to be taken to hospital straight away. Vomiting, again, seen it recently, as said, increasingly restless or agitated or combative. This often happens when, again, this could be a result of the neurochemical changes, or sometimes when people lose consciousness for a short period of time from a concussion, they come around because the airway was, maybe the tongue was blocking the airway. They have a reduction in oxygen levels in the body, and so reduction in oxygen levels in the tissues of the body, and then they become what we call hypoxic. Hypoxia is low oxygen levels in the tissue, and then when they first come round, again, this is a massive, obviously, red flag. So usually that's easily rectified by doing an airway maneuver to get them to obviously start breathing properly. But sometimes this can come on shortly after a concussion as well, so it doesn't have to lose consciousness. Now, here's some research from the Rugby World Cup in 2015. So this came out in a journal article in 2017. You can see here on the left-hand column, these were the main signs and symptoms, so both columns, of what they assessed during the Rugby World Cup in 2015 when players had confirmed concussions. So on the left-hand side there is signs of concussion, and then you see tonic posturing, convulsion, confirmed loss of consciousness, suspected loss of consciousness, and balance disturbia or ataxia. So tonic posturing is where someone, for instance, has, and again, I've seen this in Taekwondo many a times, someone has say a kick or a hit to the head, and then they will, as they go down onto the floor, one limb, for instance, such as an arm, or sometimes both arms, will just shoot out directly in front into a rigid position. Sometimes it's a leg. Sometimes I've seen one leg shoot up in the air. Sometimes I've seen a knee shoot up in the air. But for a short period of seconds afterwards, the arm will be, say, rigidly out, pointing towards the ceiling, but the competitor is unconscious on the floor. So to the untrained eye, people might think, oh, they've got their arm up, they must be okay. Well, actually, if you go over and assess them, they're completely unconscious. So it's called tonic posturing. We have convulsions. Again, as discussed earlier, confirmed loss of consciousness. It's usually obvious when they've got confirmed loss of consciousness. The one which isn't so obvious, as I said earlier, is the suspected loss of consciousness. It takes more of a trained eye to see things like the loss of body tone as they go down, or just the fact that you assess them in the first few seconds, and the lights are out. Literally, you're talking to them, giving them a pain response, and there's no one in. You've got balance disturbia or ataxia. So balance disturbia or ataxia. Ataxia is loss of coordination or balance. So in this instance, you could have someone, again, we've seen it in recent competitions, where someone is not knocked out, so someone's knocked to the ground, for instance, or they drop to their knees, and then as they get up, they've just absolutely got no coordination, no balance. And again, sometimes they will just drop back down on the floor again. Sometimes they will try and get up, and it's almost as if they're crawling forwards because they just can't get up onto their legs. So this is another key one we need to look out for. I won't go through the rest at the moment just because of time. So any athlete with suspected concussion should be removed from play, medically assessed and monitored for deterioration. No athlete diagnosed with concussion should be returned to play on the day of injury. So the key thing here is any athlete with suspected concussion should be removed from play, medically assessed and monitored for deterioration. I'm fully aware that some people will present with either, yes, they've definitely got concussion, or they've got suspected concussion, or no, we don't suspect concussion. The difficulty is the SCAT-5 is divided into an on-field assessment, which you can do fairly rapidly, and then there's an off-field assessment. Now, the rules of Taekwondo in the competition, we have 3 minutes to do an injury assessment, and then we have 2 minutes to do a head injury assessment. Again, this, as soon as the medical team suspect concussion, they will say, or they will gesture, and we've designed some hand signals which will go to the center referee, and they will gesture, but usually by tapping on the head and giving a time signal to say that actually this is a concussion assessment. So we start in the 3 minutes of injury time assessment. We then go to the 2 minutes of head injury assessment. Now, theoretically, if they cannot determine concussion within the 2 minutes, they're still doing their assessments, they can go back into I believe, the injury time assessment. But that total time is 5 minutes. So we've had situations in the past where a competitor has been hit fairly hard into the head. They've gone down on the floor, they've gone up. The center referee has said, come, obviously medical team, come and assess. So you're already using a bit of your medical time, or you're using a bit of your concussion assessment time. You can't diagnose concussions, so they're allowed to continue. A few seconds later, they get hit again to the head, they go down, they get back up, you're asked to assess. Before you know it, the medical team has actually run out of the 3 minutes, they've run out of the 2 minutes, and there is no more time to assess. And yet the person, when they're assessed before that point, is not actually showing signs of concussion. Yes, they've gone down. So this actually becomes slightly problematic because you've run out of time, and then someone is hit or punched to the head a further time. The medical team has the right to remove that competitor as a suspected concussion if they've run out of time during that competition. You could argue that it's potentially become a mismatch by that stage anyway, if they've gone down that many times that you've run out of time. But the key thing here is the medical team has the right to remove the competitor if they suspect concussion to do off-field assessments. Now, just to be very clear on this one, whatever the situation, if the medical team suspect concussion and let's say they've run out of time to assess on the ring, the off-field assessment of SCAT-5 is actually a minimum of 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. A 10 to 15 minute assessment is not practical in the middle of sparring competition. So we totally understand that that competitor then is removed from that day's sparring. If the medical team then finds that the person does have a concussion with the off-field assessment, then they would have their card cut. This is what's happened in the past, and then they would be removed from competition for 3 weeks. If during the off-field assessment they can't find a definitive concussion, there's no suspected concussion, then they would be allowed back to competition. But when they're allowed back to competition, it may well be that they've done individual sparring on that day, but later in the day, they've got power technique. So they would be allowed to continue with power technique. And maybe next day, they've got team sparring. It's just the way it has to be, because the competitor's welfare is critical here. So yeah, it's not a perfect solution. In rugby, for instance, if someone has a suspected concussion where they want to do an off-field assessment, they would actually substitute that player for another player, and then they would do a head injury assessment of that player off field. And if no concussion found, they would then swap the players back over again. So that player would come back on and the substitute would come off. We can't do that in Taekwondo. So it's not a perfect situation, but again, if there is enough grounds for the medical team to suspect concussion, they will have to remove them to do the off-field assessment. I'm not going to show the whole of this video, but all this is just each day we do training in the morning. So we usually get there an hour before the competition starts. We take the local medical team through and we do some scenarios. So the scenario here was competitors received a blow to the head, so a kick or a punch, has lost consciousness and is face down on the floor. So you can see the classic situation is that the medical team are going straight to hold the head because you can't rule out a spinal injury. I won't show this video because it goes on for a couple of minutes, but this was the first bit of training. We then tweaked a few things with the local medical team, because the local medical teams, obviously, they're not necessarily sports concussion specialists. They're doctors, they're paramedics, they deal with concussion. But what we were trying to do was refine how they recognize the potential mechanism of injury, and then obviously sped them up to get them into a position where they could assess the patient properly. So I'm just going to go on to the second one. So this is where we've done a bit more training, and then they've suspected loss of consciousness, but they've assessed the patient as breathing when they're face down, and they're rapidly getting the patient using a log roll and putting them onto a spine board to take them off to assess them either in the back of the ambulance or in the medical room. So we'll just play this video if it will. No. Okay, so we'll stop it there. The basic thing was we were trying to speed up the medical team, recognizing that this is the potential concussion with head injury and neck injury. However, they've assessed for breathing, they've rapidly turned the patient onto the back or onto a spine board if one's there, and so they can then remove for further assessment. And I know in the UK, the guidelines are, I don't know what's going to be in Slovenia, the guidelines are if anyone actually loses consciousness, they have to go to hospital to be scanned, to checked up if they have a concussion, for instance. But so I'm not sure what the rules are in Slovenia in that one. But some people might recognize actually the victim there. Tamara is actually in the crowd today watching, so I'm sorry about that. Right, so can you recognize any of these? So in the next few videos, these are from the last two competitions. We're going to be looking at, can you recognize tonic posturing, convulsion, confirmed loss of consciousness, suspected loss of consciousness, balance disturbance or ataxia, or are you just unsure of concussion, or do you just think it's a mismatch? Yeah, so I'm going to get you lot to watch the video. I'm sorry about the quality of the videos because they've been taken off live stream, so the quality is not as good anyway. And then by the time it's obviously taken off the live stream, it's the quality's not, it's deteriorated a bit more. If I need to show the video a second time, I will. But I just want you to try and make a decision and then put into the chat box whether you think it's one of those. Okay, so I'll just get the chat box up wherever that's gone. So chat box. Right, chat box. So what do we think from what we just saw there? Was that concussion, suspected loss of concussion, no concussion? Maybe you think that's not even a concussion. What, any views? If you can just type into your chat boxes, please. Oh, no one. I can't see anything going in my chat box. Is anyone? Oh, here we go. We've got one coming in. Not sure, but some concern on my part. Thank you, Jeff. Suspected concussions. Suspected question mark. The arms were stiff, so suspected concussion. Yeah, unsure of concussion. Yeah. So I've used that video actually because if we actually, I can't type fast. Thanks, Jeff. So I've used that as an example because if we actually watch that video again, in this instance, I'm just gonna, oops, hold on. Let's just put my chat to the side there. Let's just go back. Where's that video gone? Not that one. I want to go that one. So just making sure you can't see the some tonic maybe. Just want to make sure you can't actually see the chat box in the corner of this video at the moment. It's not showing in the video, is it? All right, let's just. So I would say as he's gone down there, he's actually caught himself. He's actually realized he's going down and he's just put his arms out to kind of brace himself as he's landed. He's got himself straight back up. There's no signs of ataxia there. Centre referee's done the right thing, has had a quick look in his eyes, had a quick chat with him, and actually he's let him continue. What I want to say though is I've seen other centre referees in similar situations call the medical team over for a quick assessment. You will be quite within your right to call the medical team in if you suspect that there might be a problem after an impact like that, to get the medical team to do a quick assessment. But obviously a confident centre referee who's looked into the eyes, asked some orientation questions, it's quite happy that there's no blurred vision, they're fully focused, they're looking at them, they're not, there's no slur of speech, they've not got any headache. A very quick assessment there. If you're confident, then yeah, I think the centre referee made a good decision there. Right? But again, if you feel you need support from the medical team, call the medical team in to do an assessment. Right, let's look at the next one then. Okay, so what do we think is going on there? Let's put some stuff into the chat there then. So what do we think's gone on there? Yep. So tomorrow thinks concussion. Yeah. Nicholas says concussion. Jazz says concussion. Jeff says possible concussion, but did he have a knee injury or get the medics? This is an interesting one. Yeah. So this patient here, I will answer that question in a second. I'm going to show this video again. All right. So let's just go back. I don't think that's a knee injury because if you look, both legs are completely wobbly. I've never seen anyone. So it's a good thought because some people had an opinion that might be a knee injury, but both his legs are wobbling. He had a clear kind of loss of balance for a short period of time. Now, when he was assessed afterwards, he was definitely presenting with signs and symptoms of concussion. So yes. So that would be, in my mind, that would have been ataxia. Yeah. So loss of balance, coordination. yes, he didn't get a clear blow to the head, but he's already had several blows to the head before in that round. He's also, you know, just the sudden, you know, falling to the floor, the brain can suddenly, the front of the brain can hit the head, hit the inside of the skull in a coup and then a contra coup. So that could be a non-impact, which has caused a concussion, but he might have had a build-up of impacts beforehand. So yeah, he actually had a concussion, but the centre referee didn't bring this on at that point. If you see anything what looks like a loss of balance or coordination like that, the medical team needs to come on and assess that patient. So next one here. Okay, I'll stop that one there. So we've got a few concussion from UDFA. Jeff, I believe he was concussed, but his coaches said he had a knee in. So that I think we've just covered that one, isn't it? Yeah.
So that's the previous one.
That was the previous one. Sorry, yeah. I know the coaches said he had a knee injury, but from the one before presented, yeah, sometimes the coaches say it's a knee injury, but then you look at it and go, I've never seen a knee injury cause both legs to wobble like that. But yeah, it's an interesting one, that one. Coming back to this one, definitely concussion. Yeah. Concussion, but what happened previously? So this is a very interesting point. Yeah. So this when we spoke to the coaches afterwards and people saw the fight previous, the competitor who's gone down with a concussion has had a suspected concussion in the fight previously. In fact, apparently, I think it was 6 weeks before, he was actually knocked out in a competition. And I think this was the third time he'd been knocked out in a competition in a year or something when we spoke to the coaches. So what we're concerned of here is, if I show this video again, I don't think the impact here, I mean, the competitor who was fighting against him was actually disqualified because obviously I think it was like a contact to the back of the head. However, I don't think the impact that I saw there would have normally caused that level of concussion. So the concern is, did he have a concussion from the fight before? From people who saw the fight, they suspected. However, he was not. So I think he was the Finnish competitor. He wasn't removed from competition, to have an assessment. He wasn't assessed for concussion in his fight before, so he was allowed to continue with a suspected concussion. And then in this fight here, I mean, Jeff, as you say there, it was a foul, but he probably was concussed as a result of previous damage. And so what's happened is it's a foul, but it's not the normal level of impact you would expect to cause a concussion of that severity. So this is probably a cumulative from the concussions before, which was missed. So what we need to be very clear of is that if you suspect concussion, we need to get the medical team in to assess at the time. Otherwise, we've got the situation where if they're allowed to continue, it could be a light contact like has happened there, and then they end up going down with a worse concussion. Obviously, we can have second impact syndrome as well and other problems. And then the person who was fighting against them then gets removed because the person from the foul has ended up with concussion. So we just need to be very, very clear that if we suspect concussion in previous fights, we need to assess them at the time. I'm just going to show it one more time. You can see, so I mean, he's hit the back of his head. Yes, it is a foul, but you can see he's gone down. He's got complete loss of tone as he's gone down. He's trying to get back up. He's going to try and get back up. And then look, he's gone straight back down. He's not got his balance or his coordination at this stage. Yeah. So Fluency, sometimes you're not aware of what has happened before. Yeah, I get it. Sometimes things are still going to sneak through because competitors lie as well. You know, you could assess them and go, have you got a headache? Got any blurred vision? They go, no, my vision's fine. I've got no headache. No, my spine's fine, etc., etc. And they lie to you. Yeah, I get it. We're still going to get that problem. However, sometimes the medical team can notice something which others might not notice if they assess them at times. So if you suspect concussion, you need to get them assessed. But yeah, I get it. Why did the Finnish coach not ask for a review after the previous bout? Well, this is the big question, isn't it? Why did he not ask? I don't know, but all I know from experience is coaches don't like to lose their competitors in competition. I've seen it before. Coaches, unfortunately, like competitors, will lie sometimes, yeah, or just ignore things sometimes so that their competitor could continue and try and win a competition. We've had that problem for years. We're always going to have that problem, but we need to be very aware that if that's happening, if someone suspects concussion, we need to get them assessed. Well, with coach is crucial. They need to understand the long-term effects. Exactly, absolutely critical. Yeah, this is why we're trying to educate people. The problem with second impact syndrome, the rapid swelling of the brain, that could have been the second concussion, and that could have been the one that caused second impact syndrome. It could be that if he keeps getting concussions over the next few years, and he's ignoring it, or he's lying about it, or the coach is not bringing it to the attention, he could end up with chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So part of the education there. In the end, if legal action is taken, it will be against the coach. Yeah, totally, Jeff. Yeah, totally agree. In rugby, we've got exactly that. And I'm not trying to scare people at this stage, but the coaches have a duty of care. So if we take the UK, the coach has a duty of care. The coach is not there to diagnose concussion. The centre referee is not there to diagnose concussion. That is actually up to the medical clinician. But the coach, the centre referees have a duty of care to take reasonable care. So if they suspect concussion, to then get their competitor assessed. So yeah, thank you, Jeff. Good points. Right, this one. Good. So we've got people saying concussion, loss of balance, concussion, get help quick, concussion. Okay, I'm just going to stop that there. So concussion, right. So yeah, totally concussion. Yeah. So the big clue there was the loss of body tone. He's gone floppy. We've had he's gone down onto his back. And then for a period of a few seconds, he's kind of fairly stationary on the floor. Apart from his left knee is still up in the air. That could be a bit of tonic posturing. The knee going up in the air, I've seen this before. The competitor's unconscious for a few seconds, and yet the knee shoots up. That could be tonic posturing. Yeah. What concerns me there is actually, so the coaches have done well. They've tried to keep him on the floor. What concerns me there is that, that competitor should have stayed on the floor. Head should have been immobilized until there was a diagnosis to say that A, there was no neck injury, and B, obviously, we can't diagnose a neck injury if the competitor is still not fully conscious. So they're still confused, if they still got memory problems, they still got an ongoing active concussion where they're not fully alert, then we cannot eliminate neck injury. So we need to, if that sort of situation happens, and say the centre referee or the coach is there, and the competitor is just completely looks like they're confused, they're struggling to locate words and thoughts, then they're not fully alert. So we need to keep that competitor immobilized on the floor until they fully regain consciousness and a proper assessment can happen. So yes, good. Coach actually was the correct one. Absolutely trying to keep the competitor on the floor. Medical team there, they're not always going to see what goes on. This is the problem. You've got, you know, sometimes you've got 5 rings, sometimes you've got 6 rings of sparring, but you might only have 4 or 5 medical people, and they're working in pairs, and they're already assessing or already watching one ring, and suddenly it happens in another ring. So it's really critical that as the medical team approach, that the centre referee or the coach basically gives the key details of what actually happened. Did they see a loss of tone as they went down? Were they stationary on the floor for a period of time? So that information is critical. But yes. Next one. So this was the in Croatia. So this is the last competition in Croatia. Right, let's have a mismatch again. So thank you, Jeff. So I think in that last one, there was probably a bit of a mismatch going on, and we've had some other mismatches as well. But right, let's have a look at this one. Can you see the arms? Can you see the competitor's arms? And now they're starting to flop down. Do we want to just watch that bit again? Because it's quite a blurry video, so let's just watch that one again. Look at the arms. Look at the competitor's arms as he goes down. Can you see the arms are just bent and pointing towards the ceiling for a few seconds? There is a delay here in getting the medical team in because the medical team's already assessing 2 other patients for head injuries. Okay, I'll talk through this next bit in a second. So what do we think? So concussion, I was the corner referee and was concerned that he might need clearance of the airway. Absolutely. His tongue was blocking his airway. He was not breathing when we got to him. Concussion. Yeah, absolutely, Nicholas. Yeah, concussion. He lost the consciousness with an airway problem. So I actually, when I came in, if you watch this again, the bit here, so you see he turns around, he turns into the kick, loss of body tone, tonic posturing. There's a bit of a delay until the medical team gets there because the medical team, as I say, are already assessing 2 other patients at the time, so we're getting called over. And the first thing I've done when I've come in is gone to the head, immobilized the head, and done something called a jaw thrust. So you see, I've come in and I've gone straight to the head, and I'm doing a jaw thrust. They've obviously had to take the gum shield out, but his tongue is blocking his airway. He's not actually breathing for the first few seconds here. However, I was confident from experience that if I could get a jaw thrust on very quickly, because it only just happened, then he would restart breathing. Unfortunately, within the next few seconds, he does start to breathe, but you'll notice the local medical team, the Croatian medical team, are getting a little bit concerned because it does take a few seconds for he start breathing at a good rate. So he started breathing slowly initially. Yeah. So you'll see in a second they start ripping the top off because they if I carry the video on, they start ripping the top off because they think actually potentially he's not going to start breathing properly. But I could see from my position that he was starting to breathe, but it did take a few seconds, for normal breathing. So yeah, it just proves that this is why we do the training in the morning, is so that we can get the patient into a position where we can get a jaw thrust airway maneuver on in case the tongue does block the airway, or the gum shield just goes down the back of the airway and blocks the airway or pushes the tongue back. So yes, that had loss of consciousness and tonic posturing and an airway problem. Right, so moving on. So we've actually, one of the other sections to the on-field assessment is what's called the modified Maddox questions. We've actually had to modify them because they just weren't suitable for sparring. They were, what team did you play last week? What half of the match is it? So the questions were actually based on team sports. So we've had to modify these. And what we've put is, the first question, which is a fairly generic question, is what venue or city are we in? What I've found over the years is that you get people coming from all over the world. They come to the competition. Yeah, some places are really easy to remember the name of the city. Brighton was fairly easy for most people, but some people were saying, "Oh, we're in the UK." Okay, we're in the UK. That's a good start. If you're Spanish, Argentinian, French, or whatever, and you're saying you're in the UK, yeah, at least you're kind of orientated that you're in the UK. Sometimes people just can't remember the name of the city. Yeah, right. So, what round are you competing in? So again, some competitions, isn't it? You get 2 rounds, so we can ask them what round they're competing in. If they can't remember what round they're competing in, again, this can rule concussion in. And this may change. 2 minutes later, they may suddenly remember what round they were competing in. But for the first couple of minutes, as the concussion is at its peak state, they cannot remember what round they were competing in, or they can't remember what venue they're in, or which country. Contentious one, what did you have for breakfast? This was put in. It's not one I always use, because I will ask the question, but unless I ask the question, or the medical team asks the question, and then the competitor answers the question, goes, I might have had bacon and eggs, or whatever they have for breakfast, and then they then turn around and then ask the coach or a fellow competitor, is that what they had for breakfast? I mean, I don't know. I can't remember what people next to me have for breakfast. So the chance of me remember, so I'm not expecting the coaches to remember what every single competitor had for breakfast. So sometimes we have to just rule that question out because it's just not practical. Which country, club are you competing against? And most people should be able to remember which country or club they're competing. Easy when it's the country, maybe not so easy when it's a club. So again, there could be a slight problem with that question, but it can help to rule concussion in. What was the last technique you performed? And again, I totally understand some people just can't remember what the technique they performed, but if they've got a clear memory of yes, they've done a yop shaggy, or they've done a band-aid dolly shaggy, then that's good. That's shown as good recent memory. All right, so these are just useful questions to assist the medical team. So we've got here, basically we're using the keywords recognize and remove. Yeah, so
I didn't get that.
Sorry.
Could you try again?
Siri's just, sorry, my laptop, sorry, Siri's just come on. The aim of this policy is to identify how to recognize concussion and when to remove a competitor from competition with a suspected or confirmed concussion, right? So I just need to quickly, so the text box, I need to have it there, but it's slightly across some of the wording. 2 seconds. Right, so we've just had, my concern is, so I'm just trying to see the text box, but I can't quite see it because it's, my concern here is questions for someone who does not speak the language will not work properly. Yeah, I totally get that. Sometimes we have to use a translator, and the translator might be the coach, and the coach may be actually wanting their competitor to continue and is actually answering the questions for them. We've got to be abundantly clear here, is that we're asking the competitor to answer the question, not the coach, not the referee. We then look to the coach or the referee to verify whether the answer is correct. But again, people may well be, unfortunately, lying to us as part of that and just going, yeah, no, they said this. Yeah, I mean, again, this is part of the education process, or we just might not find someone who can speak the language of the competitor. I get that. Those questions require certain you've got to have a certain execution of the language. You've got to have a certain level of kind of fluency with the language. I get it. Many times the coach does not speak the language either. Yeah. So yeah, these can be useful questions to rule concussion in, but we don't rely on them. They're just an aid as part of the rest of the questioning process. But really good points, everyone, there. I totally agree with what you're saying. But yeah, they're there to rule concussion in. Then, but if we're concerned that we're not getting good answers because of the language barriers, then we have to use other means. Right, hold on. I'm just going to move the text box again. Right. So According to Davies et al., a head impact by either a direct blow or an indirect transmission of force can be associated with a serious or potential brain injury. Yeah, we just need to remember that point. This is just a kind of synopsis of what a clinician would go through. They go through what we classically call something like a doctor C, A, B, C, D, E process. You don't need to know this. This is just a kind of, anyone who's medically minded. This is just a sort of a brief write-up of, a kind of process we go through. Everything is assessed in order. If the person's unresponsive, we eliminate catastrophic bleeds. And then, well, hopefully there won't be a catastrophic bleed within a Taekwondo competition. So our next point is then looking at airway, but we need to control the C-spine. So you saw that in the last video. I'm not going to go through this at this moment in time. It's just a bit kind of more for the clinical side. The coaches and national team's responsibility to return to play is the coaches or the national team's responsibility regarding the health and safety and the duty of care of the competitor. Yeah. Health is absence of disease. Safety is absence of harm. And duty of care is basically taking reasonable care of the competitor. So yes, you're in Slovenia, you got a suspected concussion, you return back to your native country, whatever it is. I'll use the UK as an example, just because I was from the UK. They come back to the UK and then they're told that they're not to compete for 3 weeks or return to training for 3 weeks until they've been cleared by their doctor or sports medicine, trained health professional, concussion basically trained health professional. And then next thing we know is the next week that competitor is competing in the local competition in the UK and they get a second impact syndrome. Yeah, right. It's really difficult to manage because obviously the International Taekwondo Federation have got the policy in place, but unless it's an international competition, there's no way of monitoring a local competition. However, if what we're trying to say is it's an education process here, because if there is then an injury at that local competition and the coach is aware and the competitor is aware, but the coach is aware that they were knocked out in competition, had a competition in Slovenia a week before, but the coach allows them to then compete a week later, even though they've been told not to for 3 weeks, and then they end up with a serious brain injury, then the coach has failed in the duty of care. So I've just got another question come through. Let me just have a little look. So can you please show Dr. C, A, B, C, D, E again? Yeah, sure. I can put that up quickly for you. Let's just stick that one up. All we're showing there is basically, once they've immobilized the head, they've dealt with C-spine, they put a jaw thrust on as part of airway, they then check breathing rate. And so you see in the video before, what I was trying to do was then check breathing. I know from experience that if someone is knocked out, the tongue is usually the biggest cause of someone stopping breathing. If we can get the helmet off, if we can get the gum shield out, and we can get a jaw thrust on very quickly, most of the time the competitor will start breathing again. You're welcome. Okay, right, moving forwards. So again, it's the coaches and national team's responsibility regarding the health and safety and the duty of care of the competitor. The competitor gets fully assessed when back in their country. Yeah, they're not to train or compete for 3 weeks or 21 days until their GP or physician assesses them and says they're no longer symptomatic of concussion. The national team association is, it's up to the national team or the local association to keep a record of the concussion, yeah, so that they are not in competition for the next 3 weeks. And there needs to be communication with the medical and anti-doping committee regarding the competitor's return to play. Right, so some of these are projects underhand at the moment, but that's what the process has to be. Thank you. Any questions?
So thank you, Kirk. I think what we're going to do is, if you have any questions, I think probably rather than having people kind of speak out, maybe write them down in the chat. If, for example, it takes you a very long time to write your messages out, you can always pop your hand up, and then we can see if, and then Kirk can kind of pick you one by one, because in fact, put your hand up through your reactions tab. So if you go down to reactions tabs, it's got you've got the ability there to be able to raise your hand. And then instead of typing it, maybe if it's a long question, because I know some of you like to ask long questions, then I know I am talking to somebody particularly here right now, then you can do it that way. So please go ahead. Any questions? Fire away.
Oh, Jeff's got his hand up. I knew this was going to happen.
Yeah, I'm going to apologise. I mean, I want to say right at the start, this is excellent that we're moving in this direction. I just want to make a couple of observations. One, that I've seen in previous competitions, obviously to move things on, we get competitors, and I've seen a situation in when we have quarters where a competitor can go from bout to bout to bout. They should be given time break, but I've seen jury presidents in the past, come on, get on, get on, get on. That's got to stop. I've seen that. I saw that a few years ago. And I'm not even sure that the competitor realized what was going on. But that's one of the things. The checks, we come back to the checks. In rugby, like you say, I think one way around it, and I know the tournament organizers are going to shoot me for this, one way of doing it is to stop the bout, check them, and then restart the bout after you've checked them. That, if you want to do it properly, that's one way of doing it. Now, I know that will disrupt the competition, but it's one way that you address the situation if you want to protect the competitor's health. So I just put that.
Can I just add in that? So yeah, obviously this is something at an international level they obviously decided, which is above my head. But I've actually recently done medical for a local Taekwondo competition in the UK, and they were doing exactly that. They were literally, if someone had a suspected concussion, they were taking that competitor off. We were doing the off-field assessment, and they were just allowing another fight to continue while the off-field assessment was going on. So I have seen that happen, but yeah. Thank you.
So I throw that out. The concern that I've got is with, and I hope it won't be taken amiss, it's the people that are crucial in this are the coaches. They've got to start being honest about their competitors, because we don't see what's gone before. We've got a protocol now, and my concern is that if we don't follow that protocol, we're laying ourselves open to increased culpability. This is one of the troubles. You have a protocol, we've got to follow it. So that's and the final point is, I'm really pleased that you're working a system out to deal with people who are concussed and how that's addressed. I think each national association through the team are going to have to look at this very carefully to ensure that they don't go back training the following week and no one knows about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, thank you. No, very, very good points. Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Things is, yeah, he's saying, especially things like the coach needs to be honest. You know, in the UK, it comes under a duty of care. A duty of care means reasonable care. You've got to take reasonable care. Yeah. And unfortunately, and I don't want, again, I'm not gonna lay this on too much. I'm just gonna say that, you know, if there was a death from a head injury, say in a UK competition, and the coach had, because let's face it, there are live streams everywhere nowadays, so people can go back on the live stream and see what's happened. And if it was picked up that the coach had actually allowed their competitor to continue with a known concussion or suspected concussion, not had them assessed, then they have broken their duty of care. That would go to a coroner's court in the UK, and the coach would be called into coroner's court as a witness. Yeah. Not trying to scare people. I'm just trying to say that's what happens in the UK. I have no idea what would happen in Slovenia, but yeah, we just need to be aware of that point. So yeah, thank you, Jeff. I don't know if Master Lear or Grandmaster Vider, if you have any thoughts on those before we move on.
Yeah, if we do not have further questions, but I see from Mrs. Tamara Ibrich that there is a question.
Since we were using the sports data system and all competitors have their profiles saved in it, is there a possibility to block their profiles for the next competition in case they are diagnosed with a concussion, just so they can compete in a case of head injury? That's a really good point, but I don't work on the sports data system, so I don't know. That might be a question I have to throw over to you, you lot.
I believe that this is to do with our communication with the Medical Anti-Doping Committee. So the plan is to have the Medical Anti-Doping Committee have adopted this policy, so they will be assisting in implementing it. Keeping data and records of everything that is happening is really important with regards to the history of competitors. But of course, we don't know what's happening in people's countries in their training, you know, and also things that happen at home, because sometimes people might just hit their head and get a concussion and we don't know about it. So there are things that we just don't know about. So we can only record what we know in the ITF, and that's why it's important to keep the data. I believe there will be some. I mean, we're at the first stages of this. So it's a very good question, Tamara, and we will be looking into what we can do, and we have to work with coaches. Also, we want to not be looking like we're working against them. We have to be working with them to ensure that the priority is the safety of the competitor at all times. So it is something that we've considered and we've been talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. UDIFA, so we've got a question here. When calcium and potassium levels rise during the first few days of concussion, should the person injured not be given food rich with these nutrients as well? I get what you're thinking, and it's quite logical thinking. I like your thinking. You're saying, should the person injured not be given food rich with these? So what we're actually doing though is we've got a natural equilibrium of electrolytes. So your potassiums, your calciums, your sodiums. And so what the neurons are doing is you've got this massive increase in electrical function, neurochemical changes within the first couple of minutes and, you know, a few minutes afterwards. They're actually using reserves of these electrolytes. And then, you know, so the period of time, so if I just go back to this presentation, if I can just find, hold on, I'm just gonna, 2 seconds. Just going to show you this slide again, which has the image on it. Let's try and share that again. So I guess you can see that what you're seeing there is, yeah, that increase in calcium is going on for a good kind of 3 to 6 days afterwards. The actual increase in potassium use is going on for obviously between 6 to 30 minutes. Yeah. Right. And then we don't know, because the graph's not telling us what's going on once it goes back. Is it going back to baseline, or is it dropping below baseline? I've looked at it and I've not seen any research to say that it is unsafe to feed people with nutrients such as potassium and calcium in, because you have a natural level you need in your body to function. So for instance, you know, people who are what we would call hyperkalemic, or hypokalemic. If someone actually ends up with too much potassium in their system, a lot of people don't realize this. Death row in America, one of the lethal injections is actually a potassium injection. Right? So by giving massive increases in potassium, yes, that can actually stop the heart from working. Right? But the amount you're going to get from food, for instance, or normal kind of nutrition, is not going to take you above those levels unless you've got dysfunction, something like your kidneys, for instance. So yeah, the body's using a massive amount of calcium for several days after, yeah, but your body still needs calcium in many forms. It needs it for bones, it needs it for other functions, it needs for all the cells need to have a certain level of calcium, etc. in them. So I've not seen any evidence to say don't take calcium, don't take potassium for 3 days after. If I find anything, I will update you in a future presentation, but there's nothing out there at the moment to say that. But good question, thank you.
We've got a question here from Florencia. You can see that one there. So medical teams should be properly informed and educated. Sometimes because of the pressure, they delay the decision. Then a competitor gets better and it makes things tough. I mean, in local competition, sometimes it happens. They need to know the Taekwondo rules.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, we have a meeting actually with we've already had a meeting with the chief medical officer online with the medical anti-doping committee chair, Sabina Mason. That happened last month. And then when we arrive in Copper, we're going to have a meeting with the chief medical officer for the venue and also his team. So we're going to have a chance to go through everything that we've been through. And we are absolutely on the same page. And I think Kirk can reaffirm that as well.
Yeah, we've been in. I'm in almost daily contact with Gasper, who is the doctor who is going to be in charge of medical for the World Cup. He has his medical team of him and 4 paramedics. His 4 paramedic, they're called paramedics in Slovenia. They're not quite trained the way we train paramedics in our level, but they are clinicians. They are autonomous. They can make medical decisions. He's training them with the same presentation, the videos. He's asking all the questions. So, which is a massive step forwards, because normally in past competitions you turn up and you meet the local medical team on the day, and then you don't have time to train in the SCAT 5. So he's already trained his team in the SCAT 5. And we've been going through the videos with him of potential concussions and concussions. So we are actually ahead of the game on this one. We'll see what it looks like when we get there. But you talk to him, he's a very, very qualified and competent doctor. So I feel we should be in good hands at the moment.
I think as well, we've got every single morning we're going to be doing this evac. So it means that the education will be there. We know the level of a World Championships compared to a level of a World Cup are completely different, because you're more likely to have mismatches in a World Cup than you would in a World Championships. So that's why the risk is that little bit higher. So everybody will be absolutely, on board with this.
And also at the end of each day, there will be a team debrief. So if there is a consistent issue going on during the day, then there will be a team debrief, and obviously the medical team can then obviously feed back any sort of concerns or improvements to obviously the umpire committee. So there will be a dialogue going on as well. So yeah. Also,
I mean, communication with the umpires directly, and we have there'll be a short presentation at the umpire meeting and at the coach meeting as well. So it means, as well as these 4 presentations that we've done over the last 2 months, there's going to be continued support for everybody, so they really fully understand what's going on. We've got a question here from Lotta. Is there a difference between juniors and seniors in the time required for healing after a concussion or getting back into the ring?
Not that I've seen. So the consistent message is the 3-week rule. Again, we've had this discussion before. There is a sport out there somewhere in the world who is saying that if a competitor gets 3 concussions in a year, then they are basically barred from that sport. And I can't remember which sport it is. I've seen the research on it. So it is not to say that other sports haven't got researchers where they've got a difference in opinion. However, as far as the SCAT 5 is concerned, there's a SCAT 5 for under 14s and there's a SCAT 5 for over 14s, 14s or over. And both of them, the consensus at the moment is the 3-week rule, and rugby, again, has been kind of pioneering this. They're way ahead of the game. And they have consistently, so I teach rugby first aid, rugby medicals to do medical for rugby competitions, and for under 14s, they are doing 3 weeks as well. So as far as we're doing at the moment, we're going with the 3-week research.
We've got a question here. Well, it seems to be fairly similar what Jeff and Lotta are saying. So this is about information from competitors and coaches that they confirm they've had no previous concussions or their medical histories. I mean, we can, at the moment, we're in a position where we can only recommend things, because this isn't something that we're really, I would say, enforcing. Perhaps in the future, if we go down this avenue, there'll be something on sport data, but it has to be really. We have to be careful with keeping people's data because of the Data Protection Act. So ideally, you'd want to have that information so that we know. Now, you would have, say, for example, we have over a period of time, within a year, if somebody has 3 concussions, well, they absolutely should not be taking part in a world event like a World Cup, World Championships, European Cup, anything like that, or a continental, even any tournament whatsoever with any kind of contact. But as we said before, unfortunately, we don't always get all the information. So we can only work with the information that we've got. Perhaps there can be a declaration in the future, but as I say, we are going through this step by step, and we're learning as we're going, because the plan is now, not just to implement this here, but to implement this worldwide, with the help and the assistance of the Medical Anti-Doping Committee, to implement this into every continent, every country, so that the national associations are also following this, and able to train their own people in their country and the medical staff that are working in their competitions. In the past, I can tell you, for example, in England, we used to use volunteering organizations like St. John's Ambulance or the Red Cross. Now, we won't do that. We will always use highly professional people because of the seriousness of this. And in fact, there was one thing on that clip with the Finnish competitor. I don't know if you noticed, but when he got hit in the head, he did have a hit with the back of the head on the ground straight afterwards, which may have contributed to the situation that he had. So sometimes identifying these kind of things is really important, and we're learning as we go with this. And the more footage we get, actually, the easier it becomes. Kirk, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I totally agree. It's it's a working process at the moment. If we get this right at the national level, we cascade it, the international level, we'll cascade it down to the national level, and it's going to feed down into the kind of, the local associations, isn't it? But yeah, there was a form that asked, Jeff Rice says there is a form that asks all competitors to make such a declaration. So that's off the back of the one before.
I think that's the one on the on sport data, which every competitor completes before they can take part. So, but it doesn't give the opportunity to write down any medical history. It's just to sign a declaration.
Can we change? Oh, sorry, Jeff's going to ask a question. Go for it, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how far you take it, because I suppose the only way that you can address that is actually insist that all competitors have a medical, particularly if they're sparring, and that's what they do in certain competitions.
They do that in boxing,
and what have you.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not suggesting that we are in a position to do that, but maybe we are moving. Maybe we are moving in that direction, in an evolutionary rather than a revolutionary way.
Yeah, if I take another sport as well, so I do a lot of stuff with superbike. So for instance, if people are competing in national superbike competitions in the UK, and they're diagnosed with a concussion, they're put on a stop list for 3 weeks. And so the doctor will immediately email someone from the national body, who then puts them on a stop list for 3 weeks. Now they actually have to do a fit to ride to then actually, so there's a form that has to be filled in, which they are sent, which has to be signed by a doctor or a sports concussion healthcare professional, and they have to have that form signed to say they are fit to ride at the end of 3 weeks. If there's ongoing concussions, etc., they won't get the fit to ride. That is the way sports are going. Now, it brings up the question. I'm not saying that's going to happen within Taekwondo at the moment, because, so obviously we're moving forwards. But if other sports are doing it, usually this is where it ends up. So if, for instance, what happens if someone comes on after 3 weeks in motorbike racing, they're no longer symptomatic concussion, they then come to the next meetup, say 4 weeks later, which is a big national competition, they present themselves with the form, the actual doctors are there early in the morning and actually would do a fit to ride assessment with them. We as paramedics help them out, do the fit to rides. And then, you know, as long as they're not, again, they could lie. That's the problem. They could lie about it, but at least there is a process in place. So if anything obvious is picked up. So yeah, it may be something we have to think about. Thank you.
So Editha made the idea of the PAR-Q form. I think we want to get to a point where everything is done online, and the only way you can do an entry is that when you've completed, you know, so say for example a sport data entry, that is, it can only be completed if you have gone through this particular process. So perhaps something like a PAR-Q form would be an idea, but I think it's about declarations. So we want to get declarations from people with regards to their where they're at. Florencia makes the concern about the questions, because in the cases that to see if the competitor is okay, so the modified Maddox questions about the languaging. Coaches might have a basic knowledge of the language, and then the decision is critical. Absolutely, I agree with that. But I think, I mean, maybe Kirk can go into this a little bit more. I think it's about how the competitor replies rather than what their response necessarily is, because you can tell if someone's really searching in their mind for an answer. What do you think?
Yeah. So we've got a couple of things, and without bringing fancy words out, you know, we've got something called dysphasia, and we've got something called dysarthria. Dysarthria is basically slurred speech, and we've got dysphasia, which is difficulty in locating thoughts and words. We've got something called expressive dysphasia, where they're literally searching for those words and thoughts in their mind, but they just can't quite find them. And then we've got receptive dysphasia, where you're talking to someone, but they're just taking really long to process the question you've said to them. So there are big clues in the way they're communicating, yes. And obviously, but we need to know what's normal for that person. I mean, from a clinical perspective, you can recognize if someone literally just cannot find basic words, etc. But yeah, again, the problem, yeah, we can look at signs, we can look at the way they're presenting. They could kind of like, they could have a vacant or glazed look in their eyes. They could have, you know, or they just literally cannot, you know, maybe the coach is asking them questions in their own language and the person's just got a slurred speech as they replied, or they're really just taking ages to try and just like give their reply. Yeah, they would be indicators that there's the problem going on. But again, if there's any doubt whether the language difficulty is making it look like it's a concussion rather than actually they're presented as concussion, you know, we would have to do an off-field assessment. That's the key thing. If we've got any doubt, then we would just have to do an off-field assessment. If there's any doubt there's concussion, and we can't say definitively we can rule in concussion, we can't rule out concussion because, you know, the language barrier, but there's enough suspicion of concussion, then they will have to remove from competition to do an off-field assessment. And there's a whole load of balance tests and other tests that we can do there. Again, yes, we will need someone who can translate, but you know, there's some fairly comprehensive tests there. So it's not a case of, I've said this before, I don't think we're actually removing any more people from Taekwondo competitions with suspected concussions than before the policy. We just have a set process in place, and the medical teams have a set format to use now. So it's not about trying to remove extra people. It's just, if we think the questions aren't working because of a language barrier, we're going to have to use other tools. You know, they're useful for ruling concussion in. If we can't rule concussion in because there's a language barrier, then the medical team has to use another tool.
And that this is an important thing, because we're not changing the rules here. We're just putting a policy in process, so that people understand what can happen. In the past, people who were concussed were able to continue to compete. That's dangerous. That happened, and I believe that I saw that happen in 2019 in Inzel, because I believe I saw a concussion and the competitor was allowed to continue, and the risk behind that is quite severe. I think, Kirk, you mentioned to me, I think it was in Croatia, that you spoke with a coach who even today struggles with their memory recall because of the amount of contact they'd had in the past with competitions. You had that in the coaches meeting. They actually stood up and said that.
They came up to me afterwards and had a discussion. They still have memory problems today after having some fairly serious concussions over their career. And they were actually seeing if there are, I mean, one of the questions was, is there anything outside of the box they can use to try and improve their memory, you know, so they can help locate words and thoughts again? That's an ongoing conversation, but he notices it himself that there's a massive deterioration in memory and kind of, you know, locating thoughts, words, etc. So yes, it is happening.
I think in regards to, for example, Spanish speaking countries, you know, we can maybe ensure that if there is a situation that occurs, that either the center referee or a center referee speaks Spanish, is able to understand what's saying, because then they can maybe assist in asking the competitor through from the medical professional. The issue with asking the coach to ask the competitor is the coach can sometimes give the answer in the question. So we have to be a little bit careful with that. So perhaps that may be one way in which we can do it, to ensure there's somebody actually there when the assessment is being done who can speak directly to the competitor and ask the same questions that the medical professional is asking.
Yeah, hi, Master. Yes, I meant that because sometimes the coach might answer. There are a lot of issues going around, and sometimes that is what I said previously, that this is really relevant for the coach to know the effect of the situation. And also when you ask questions, if the questions are easier, let's like, what's your name, what is your country, it will be much easier to find out the correct answer, because sometimes in that moment, a shocking situation, the same competitor might be a little bit like say, okay, it is everything going around me. So maybe my point was, okay, make sure that the questions are maybe easier and that that are correctly addressed for someone that will reply correctly. That was, I agree with what you have said.
So Florencia, thank you for actually bringing that point up. So I will elaborate. So the questions have to be recent memory questions, not long-term memory questions. Yeah.
Okay.
So all the research shows that when you have a temporary disturbance in the functioning of your brain, it will be recent memory questions you have a problem with, not long-term memory. So if we turn around and said, what's your name? What country are you from? They're all long-term memory. You could have a clear concussion and still be able to say, yeah, my name's Kirk and I'm from the UK. Yeah. Or I'm from England. Yeah. Right.
That's
so
good.
It's a really good point what you've brought up there, but there is a massive body of research out there that says we cannot use long-term memory questions. Hence why the questions are what they are at the moment. They're all based around recent memory. There's not much we can do about it. They have to be recent memory questions.
That's a good point, and it's good to know that, because probably we were thinking about other type of questions, and we need to ask questions that are right instantly. Maybe where are you right now, or something like that. That it recall not something that has passed in the past, but recently. So the type of question, the correct type of questions, always should relate it with what is happening at that moment, mostly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What's
Thank you.
happening at the moment, what's happened maybe in the last few days, rather than, you know,
Okay.
long term, for instance. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good point. Thank you.
I think as well that when we talk about with the coaches, we want to make sure they can identify, for example, when, I know you've spoken about it before, the 2-minute recall, the 2-minute amnesia. I've had a competitor many years ago who had this, kept asking the same question after every 2 minutes, clearly concussed. And in that case, if that happens and the competitor is sitting with the coach takes the competitor instantly to the medical staff to get a proper assessment done.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, so we've got Jeff here. I assume that a jury president, center referee can insist on a concussion check if they are worried before a bout starts.
What does the rule state about that? I mean, because I would expect under a duty of care for them to do that, but what does the rule state?
Well,
sorry, sir, that's why I'm asking the question. And just a minor point, I want to say that on the video that you showed of people you know, you're doing your morning checks.
Mhm.
The checks were so realistic that at one stage, I think the umpires thought that one of their colleagues had actually injured themselves. It was so realistic.
Brilliant. I'm glad it was realistic. Thank you. That's brilliant.
So I think what can happen is you can have a category which is split over maybe 2 squares, and then it gets to a final, and then the final goes to the center ring. So it means that the people in the center ring have no idea of what's happened beforehand. The thing is, we want to catch this early, so we shouldn't have any situation like this. If there's any history, then it would be good to have that information passed across. You know, if a competitor had been stopped for a suspected concussion, maybe that information needs to go across. But of course, if there was a concussion, they wouldn't be in the final. So I think that's one of the things that we need to be aware of. Yeah, having the jury presidents involved with that conversation is really important. So it's good maybe we you know, having them maybe writing down information during about, okay, this competitor had no, not a suspected concussion, but they were stopped and they were checked for concussion, and so that information can then be passed on to the next square. That might be one way in which we can do it, but again, we need to find a way in which we can pass this information on as well as we possibly can.
And I think coming back to the point, you know, Jeff was saying that it's like, you know, if you as a jury president or centre referee looked at someone and they have the signs of red flags of concussion, or they suddenly say they've got the symptoms of concussion, you know, medically, your duty of care should be to go, I need to refer this person to the medical team. You know, I'm not sure how that would fall under rules, but medically you would have a duty of care to go, we need to get this person assessed by a clinician, you know, by a doctor, by a paramedic, whatever you know, whoever the local clinician is. I think I would expect you to get that person assessed, because otherwise you'd be failing your duty of care, whether it's in the rules or not. But that's how my thoughts lie on that one. Yeah.
What we do, you know, encourage as well is for a centre referee or a jury president to have the discussion on a mismatch. If they believe there's a mismatch involved, where you've got somebody who is international standard against somebody who's a club competitor, and there's some danger here, that discussion needs to be held at some stage, and a discussion with the umpire committee about what to do going forwards, I think, is essential. Maybe, you know, that's a discussion that both Master Kos and Master Dunbar would have with regards to whether or not they can, if there's a mismatch, what can be done. I think there used to be something in the rules years and years ago, but there isn't at the moment right now.
We had this problem, didn't we, at the last competition, where we had to assess a competitor 4 times, ran out of time. Each time the competitor went down, we had to assess. However, there was no signs of concussion. However, we ran out of time. I think the 4th time the competitor went down, and we had to turn around to the coach and say, look, really, she's going down more and more often. Our concern is if she's not got a concussion now, she gets hit again in the face, you know, she could have a concussion. And the coach done the right thing and actually removed their own competitor because of the mismatch in that situation. So, but yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I don't have anything to do with the rule side of things, but just how we dealt with it as a medical team.
Master Kos has asked, is there a study when long-term and short-term memory start?
That's a really good question. There's a lot of research on things out there. I don't want to quote anything without actually getting the research up. I mean, if you look at the Maddox questions, for instance, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull up the Maddox questions for what they've done for team sports, just so you get an idea of what they view as recent memory questions. And then I will have to dig into the research and go where the stop point is for that. But can everyone see that PDF of the SCAT5?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you can see the red flags are there. Okay. you can see we've got observable signs as well. So if there's any observable signs, such as line motionless on the playing floor, balance gait difficulties, motor and coordination, stumbling, slow labored movements, disorientation and confusion, inability to respond appropriately to questions, blank or vacant look, facial injury after head trauma, yeah? So observable signs. And then we've got the memory questions. Actually, one of the first questions they asked before the memory questions is, first tell me what happened. You know, what happened? If they can't give you, if they can't tell you what happened, or through a translator, or they're just literally struggling to find those words or thoughts, or can't just get the words out, or they're slurring their speech, again, there's a big red flag going on there. But here we go. So what venue are we at today? So this is one of the actual official SCAT 5 questions. Which half is it now? So which half of the football match is it now? Which half of the rugby match is it now? Yeah. So, you know, so we could be 40 minutes into the second half of a football match. Yeah. Right. And that is still recent memory. Yeah. Who scored last in this match? Yeah. Again, that could have happened in the first 2 minutes. And we're now, you know, 79 minutes into the rugby match. That's still recent memory. What team did you play last week? Or what was it, you know, the game you played? Again, you know, so a week ago is still recent memory, really. And yeah, usually what happens is when, you know, two rugby teams get together, or football teams get together, they have a quick recap at the beginning and go, yeah, we lost last week, we won last week. So it might be back into recent memory that way. But, you know, they're kind of saying anything up to a week is still recent memory. Did your team win the last game? Right. So again, talking about a week before, might have been a couple of weeks before. So that sort of stuff is recent memory. I will try and dig out some research what the definitive cutoff point is for it. But, you know, we've kind of based our questions around the sort of, you know, fairly recent kind of, you know, days. You could probably go up to a couple of weeks. Long-term memory would definitely be, my name is Kirk. You know, I mean, I've had that for a long, long time. Yeah, what country I'm from. So that's definitely different. So if you look at people who've got dementia, for instance, certain types of dementia, they will suddenly go back into their past, and they feel like they're 20 years old again, and yet they're 85. They've got dementia, and they start wearing, you know, finding old dresses from the attic and wearing their old dresses and dressing like they were 25 again. Yeah, so they've just regressed. And so unfortunately what happens with things like dementia is, like, it's the recent memory in the recent years which start to deteriorate, but the long-term stuff stays there. So there is some research from dementia, for instance, as well, but that's different to recent memory within head injuries. But I will try and dig it out. But just while we're on this one, I'll just quickly go through the rest of this. This is the on-field assessment. So obviously we've got this is what we call Glasgow Coma Scale, which is a level of response. So what are their eyes doing? So your clinical people will be looking at eyes very closely. They'll be listening to verbal responses. Is it incomprehensible sound, inappropriate words? Are they confused? Or are they just, yeah, they're completely orientated? Best motor response, which is movement. So they're not moving at all, or there's an extension to pain if you squeeze the shoulders, or there's an abnormal flexion to pain, flexion withdrawal to pain, they localize pain, or they just completely obey commands. Yeah, so there's a few things. And then cervical spine assessment. Does the athlete report that the neck is pain-free at rest? You know, if the athlete goes, no, actually, as soon as the standard go, no, my neck hurts. All right, you're going to have to come off. Simple as, yeah. If there's no neck pain at rest, does the athlete have a full range of active pain-free movement? You know, can they turn the head to the left, to the right, chin down, chin up? Yeah, that's fine. Is the limb strength and sensations normal? But basically what they're saying in the SCAT 5 on the on-field assessment is, in a patient who is not lucid or fully conscious, a cervical spine injury should be assumed until proven otherwise. Yeah. So they're not just relying on these memory questions here. They are using a whole field of other techniques, which they're quickly going through within the short period of time that they've got. But again, it's saying there, if you look at this, if any of the red flags or observable signs are noted after a direct or indirect blow to the head, the athlete should be immediately and safely removed from participation and evaluated by a physician or licensed healthcare professional. Yeah, right. So if any of the red flags or observable signs are noted, yeah, after. Remember this, so there's your observable signs. These are just helpful, the questions to rule in. Yeah, obviously any C-spine pain, they're not going to continue. And then again, GCS or Glasgow Coma Scale is also observable signs. So you can see it's part of a package of things. I won't go into the rest of the SCAT 5 because, you know, we'll be here all year, but this is, there's a whole load of symptom evaluation. I'm not going to go into the detail, disorientation, immediate memory, digits backwards, neurological screens, balance. An indicator what we're up to.
Okay, well, thank you for all of the information. Are there any other questions? We have quite a few questions today, which is good. I've got one question up here from Lotta. You can unmute yourself, Lotta, if you wish to ask the question.
Hello, I'm Lotta from Finland. I'm secondhand and I'm a paramedic by profession. So I'm really interested in this topic, and it is a really important thing that someone's assessing it. Are there any, how can I say it? Are there any research of concussions in ITF sparring? Is there any sort of like numbers, how much there is or anything? Because I haven't found any, and I'm trying to write an article to our Taekwondo magazine in Finland, and it's really hard to find anything in ITF Taekwondo related. Thank you.
You've got a very good point there. Thank you, Lotta. I've scoured the databases. I cannot find any research on ITF. I can find stuff on WTF, but nothing on ITF. And this is kind of the first stepping stone where we're trying to at least get numbers data together from each of the national competitions of how many concussions, suspected concussions, and then obviously people who we say have not got a concussion during the competition. So we're trying to keep kind of data from that side of things. But I think there's a really interesting research project to be created off the back of injury surveillance. We've been keeping the videos of, obviously you saw the videos today. I believe this is the first time this has happened that anyone is actually collecting the videos of the active concussions so we can educate. But yeah, we've been saying this for a while. We actually need to create a research project of injury surveillance and start doing something with this data to see how big the problem is. But no, you're right. There's nothing at the moment.
One of the things that we did do, if you remember in Spain, when we were there, we actually collated the information, and then we worked out that the majority or the most number of concussions or suspected concussions that we had were in the junior male category. The others slightly less, but the junior male was where they were the most. So, but this is something that is actually, yeah, you're right. It's a project for someone to do, perhaps, finding people who are willing to step forwards and to do that, whether it's going to be part of the medical anti-doping committee's job, or if they actually find somebody externally to do that, would be great. The thing to remember is that we do light contact. We're not doing full contact. So really, there shouldn't be concussion unless it's an accident, because ideally we want to have people controlled. However, our competitors are fast. They're really fast. And sometimes they're so fast, even the umpires don't even see the points. And I know that's been experienced in the past. So we have to be very careful with when we are making decisions, and the decisions will be made by the chief medical officer in Slovenia, not by Kirk or anybody else. So it will be a professional decision that will be made by the doctor who is going to be there.
Yeah.
Lotta,
I was just going to say, Lotta, I mean, if it's something that you want to liaise with me, I mean, obviously, because I'm in contact with the medical anti-doping committee, if it's something you want to, want to liaise with me over, we can maybe, if you're interested in this, because I'm interested in this subject, obviously, because this is where we are, then feel free to get in contact or just ping your contact into the chat, and then we can kind of maybe chat further and see where this goes in the future.
Thank you very much for the answers. I would be really interested in getting into this in the future. You're all coming to World Cup, right?
Yes.
Yes, so I can talk to you in face to face. But I will contact you if that's okay by email. Considering about the article I'm about to write, it's a short and not really a scientific one, but I'm for a long time I've been wanting to assess this this problem sort of our coaches don't know what a concussion is and how to assess it when they see it. And as you saw from the video, the Finnish coach, they sort of wanted to talk their way out of it. So I don't know if it's ignorance or what, but yeah, I'd like to assess that problem. So I will contact you. Thank you.
Definitely. Brilliant. We'll be in contact. Perfect.
This is all about education, and you can see just like how much awareness we've already brought about just by bringing this subject to the forefront. And your questions today, everybody, have been brilliant. Thank you ever so much. We have gone over quite a long more time than we'd expected, but thank you very much. If you want to do this again, of course you can do this afternoon if you're really that keen. There'll be some Spanish translation this afternoon as well. But thank you very much, everybody, today. I'm going to pass the last word to Grandmaster Weiler.
Thank you, Master Leah. Well, as we realized, we are at the beginning of a long journey, but every journey starts with the first step, and the first step has been done now. And I'm really grateful to Master Leah and Mr. Kirk Lee because of the initiative and the help they provided to the ITF. And to be honest, it is the duty of all of us when we deal with a contact sport like ITF Taekwondo sparring. And this, of course, contains risk. And it is our duty to minimize the risk. And when I say to all of us, then it means the coaches, the referees, the medical team, and of course the ITF as an organization. So as I mentioned, the first step has been done. I'm really, really grateful to both gentlemen, and I believe they deserve a big applause for the work. And we will continue, maybe also with a survey to the coaches and referees. But I'm in a steady contact with Master Leah and Mr. Lee. And thank you again. And as I said already in the beginning, I cannot participate in the afternoon, but we will keep in touch. And I hope to see you in Copa, and not just via a virtual platform, but physically. So take care, have a nice weekend, and many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sirs.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
To see you all in a couple of weeks.
Oh, yes, sir. Absolutely.
Enjoy.
Thank you, Master Leah, Mr. Lee. I think it was a very successful